I still remember the sting in my chest when my own son looked me dead in the eyes and said, "Maybe if you'd gone to college, you'd actually understand how the world works." He said it with a smirk, like he was doing me a favor by spelling it out, like I should have been grateful for the insult. We were standing in his sleek new apartment, full of chrome finishes and things I could never afford when I was his age. I had just brought over a housewarming gift, a handmade quilt, stitched from fabric pieces I'd saved from his childhood clothes. It wasn't expensive, but it held years of memories in every corner. He looked at it, half laughed, and tossed it on the couch like it was an old receipt. Then he turned back to his friends and launched into a story about his latest promotion. When I tried to chime in, just a small comment about how proud I was, he cut me off with that line. "Mom, seriously. This isn't like scrubbing floors or whatever, it's real work. College work." His friends laughed, not in a mean way, not intentionally, but they laughed. And I stood there, holding the box the quilt had come in, my mouth slightly open, not sure what hurt more, the words, or how normal he made them sound. I didn't argue. I didn't correct him. I didn't remind him that I cleaned houses to pay for his school, that I skipped meals so he could go on class trips, that I slept in my van between shifts to keep the lights on. Instead, I smiled. And in that exact moment, something inside me shifted. He didn't know it yet, but the world he thought he ruled was already slipping from his hands. Before we start, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. My name is Clarice Milton, and for most of my life, I believed that hard work and love were enough. I never wore fancy clothes. I never went to college, but I never complained. Not once, because everything I did, every floor I scrubbed, every early morning and aching joint, was for my son, Jordan. I had Jordan when I was 21, fresh out of high school and freshly abandoned by his father. We lived with my grandmother for the first 2 years while I juggled 3 jobs, cleaning houses, waitressing at night, and sewing for neighbors to earn extra cash. I was exhausted, but I never let him see it. I used to tell myself, if I can just get him to a better life, it will all be worth it. When he was little, he used to wait by the window every day until I got home. I'd see his little face pressed to the glass, holding his toy dinosaur, grinning like I was his entire world. He used to say, "Mom, when I grow up, I'm going to buy you a big house so you never have to clean again." And I believed him. Not because I expected the house, but because I believed in the heart behind that promise. As he grew, so did my business. What started with a mop and a beat-up vacuum turned into Clarice's home and office cleaning. I hired 3 women from my church, then 5, then 10. We didn't just clean, we cared. We remembered birthdays, we stocked toilet paper, we left fresh flowers in waiting rooms, we built trust, and word spread. By the time Jordan was in high school, my company had contracts with local clinics, schools, and even a few corporate offices downtown. One of those offices was the same company he would later intern at, the one that launched his tech career. Still, I never saw myself as a businesswoman. I saw myself as a mother who worked hard. I showed up in plain jeans and gloves, clipboard in one hand, keys in the other. I was proud but quiet. I didn't go around bragging. I just wanted to keep growing so I could keep supporting him. Jordan got accepted into college with a partial scholarship. I cried the day we opened the letter. He was the first in our family to go. I remember hugging him so tightly he said I was going to crack his ribs. He laughed and said, "Don't worry, Mom, I'll make it all worth it." I told him, "You already have." We couldn't afford a meal plan, so I cooked and froze 2 weeks' worth of food every Sunday and drove them to his dorm. I did his laundry. I paid for his textbooks in installments. When the bursar's office threatened to drop his classes over an unpaid balance, I sold one of my company vans and took the bus for 6 months just to cover it. He never asked me to do any of it, but he never stopped me either. The older he got, the more distance I felt. He started visiting less during holidays. His calls grew shorter. When I asked how school was going, I got one-word answers. Fine. Busy. Good. Still, I told myself this was normal. Kids grow up, they find their own way. I wanted him to become independent. That's what I had worked for. After graduation, he landed a job in Chicago at a rising tech startup. He called me thrilled. I celebrated like it was my own achievement. I told my church group, my coworkers, even the mailman. My boy made it, I'd beam, holding up the company's website on my phone. A few months later, his firm put out a cleaning contract bid. Jordan called and suggested I submit my company. Just don't expect any favors, he said, almost joking. I smiled and told him I didn't need any. My work spoke for itself. We got the contract. I still remember the first day I cleaned that building. I wore my nicest company uniform and brought fresh pastries for the front desk staff. Jordan passed me in the hallway and gave me a tight-lipped smile. "Just don't embarrass me," he muttered as he walked by. That was the first crack in the glass, but I ignored it. Because for me, just being near him, seeing the life he was building, made it all worth it. I told myself his coldness was stress, that he was adjusting, that deep down he still saw me the way he did when he was 5, waiting by the window, proud to call me Mom. I had no idea that version of him was already gone. The first red flag didn't come with a loud bang. It came quietly, disguised as a joke, tucked inside a conversation that should have been filled with pride. It was Jordan's first company mixer. Employees could bring family members, and he invited me, almost as an afterthought. "You don't have to stay long," he said over the phone. "Just show your face, meet some people. Keep it light." I didn't think much of the phrasing at the time. I was just happy he thought to include me. I bought a new blouse for the occasion. Navy blue with soft ruffles. Not too flashy, not too plain. I even had my hair done at a salon, something I hadn't done in years. I wanted to show him I could fit in with his world, even if I didn't belong to it. When I arrived, the office lobby was buzzing with energy. Glass walls, minimalist furniture, people in tailored suits holding cocktails and laughing like they'd never scrubbed a toilet in their lives. I felt out of place, but I told myself, "You've built your own company, Clarice. You belong anywhere." Jordan came down to greet me. He looked sharp. Clean-cut hair, blazer over a black t-shirt, expensive watch I didn't recognize. His hug was quick and a little stiff. "Glad you made it," he said, glancing at his phone. "Come on, I'll introduce you to a few people." We moved through the crowd. He made small talk, laughed too hard at his coworkers' jokes, then he gestured toward me. "And this is my mom, Clarice. She owns a cleaning company." A few heads nodded politely. "She actually handles our building's janitorial stuff," he added with a casual chuckle. "I mean, I literally got my work ethic from watching her mop floors." Everyone laughed, not in a cruel way, more like a group laugh that no one wanted to be left out of. But it hit me like a slap. The way he said it, the tone, like I was a punchline, like mopping floors was a quirky childhood memory and not the reason he had shoes on his feet. I tried to smile, but something tightened in my chest. "Well, it paid for a lot more than floors," I said, attempting to keep the mood light. Jordan gave me a look, subtle but sharp, the kind of look that says, "Don't make this about you." A woman nearby asked what kind of cleaning we did. Before I could answer, Jordan cut in. "Mostly commercial, offices and stuff. She runs a pretty tight ship." He said it like he was describing someone else's business, like it wasn't tied to his childhood, to our story. Later, as I sipped water by the snack table, I overheard him talking to a group of people near the windows. I didn't catch all of it, but I heard one line clearly. "She's great, my mom, but we don't exactly talk business. I try to keep those worlds separate." He said it so smoothly, so decisively, like I was part of a life he'd outgrown, and now he needed to box it up neatly to make room for the new one. I left a little while after that. I didn't say goodbye. I just slipped out the side door, walked 2 blocks to where I parked my van, and sat in the driver's seat for 15 minutes, staring at the dashboard. He wasn't rude. He didn't yell or insult me outright, but the message was clear. He was embarrassed, not of me as a person, not yet, but of what I represented. Hard labor, unpolished ambition, a life without credentials. I'd given him my entire world so he could build his. But in that moment, I realized he didn't want to be reminded of the foundation his life was built on. It was like I'd become a shadow, useful when needed, invisible when not. That night, I didn't cry. I wasn't sure what to feel. Hurt? Disappointed? Ashamed? Instead, I sat at my kitchen table and replayed every moment from that evening. His tone, his words, his eyes when he looked at me in front of his coworkers. Not as a son looking at his mother, but as a man managing an image. The first red flag had waved, gentle but undeniable. And even though I didn't know what was coming next, I knew something between us had changed. Not because of what he said, but because of what he no longer saw in me. After the company mixer, something in me started paying closer attention to his tone, his pauses, the subtle ways he created distance between us. What used to be small inconsistencies began to feel like deliberate choices. I wasn't imagining it anymore. The phone calls grew shorter. At first, I chalked it up to his workload. "Startups are intense," he'd say. "Can we talk next week?" But then next week became next month, and soon I was the only one initiating the calls. When I asked about his projects or his life, he'd give me a few vague answers, then pivot. Always polite, never cruel, but distant. Like I was a stranger in a story he didn't feel the need to share. When I'd bring up my own business, even in passing, he'd listen with that polite, practiced smile. Once I told him I landed a contract with a private school, a big win for my team. He just nodded and said, "That's cute, Mom." Cute. As if the years I spent cleaning cafeterias and managing budgets were a hobby. I laughed it off, but I felt something slip away every time. He stopped inviting me to things, too. Birthday dinners turned into drinks with friends. Holidays became optional. "We're doing something low-key this year," he'd text, like he was doing me a favor by not including me. One Thanksgiving, I spent the whole day cooking. Turkey, stuffing, sweet potatoes, the works, thinking maybe he'd surprise me. Maybe he'd knock on the door, grinning like the little boy who once helped me peel carrots. But the knock never came. Just a photo he posted on social media, standing beside his fiancée and her family at a sleek restaurant. The caption read, "Grateful for the people who push me to be better." I stared at that photo for a long time. Then came the conversations. The ones that chipped away at me one word at a time. We were having lunch once when I mentioned I was thinking about expanding the business again, maybe taking on another crew. His fork paused mid-air. "Are you sure that's a good idea at your age?" he asked. "At my age? I just mean, don't overextend yourself," he added quickly. "You've done great for someone without formal training." Someone without formal training, that one landed hard. He didn't say it with malice. He didn't have to. His face said everything. A gentle pat on the head from someone who thought they'd outgrown you. I started doubting myself. I'd look at my hands, rough and calloused from years of work, and wonder if he saw them as worn out. I began rereading emails before sending them to clients, afraid I'd come off unprofessional. I second-guessed decisions I used to make with confidence. His voice was in my head more than I wanted to admit. Even at church, I started declining leadership opportunities. I told them I was too busy, but the truth was I didn't feel sharp enough anymore. I started believing the idea that maybe, just maybe, I had reached my ceiling, that everything I'd built was enough, and there was no point in trying for more. But the worst part wasn't what Jordan said. It was how I started to believe him. When I cleaned the lobby of his office building, I moved faster, avoided eye contact with his coworkers, made myself invisible. Not because I was ashamed of my job, but because I knew he was ashamed of me. One morning, I was vacuuming the hallway outside his department when I heard someone say, "Isn't that your mom?" There was a pause. Then his voice, "Yeah, but she's just one of the vendors. Not like she works here. Not like she works here." I stood there, hand still on the vacuum handle, listening as footsteps faded around the corner. I waited a full minute before moving again. I don't even remember finishing that floor. After that, I stopped taking contracts near his company. I told my team it was a scheduling issue, but really, I couldn't stomach the idea of him pretending I didn't exist. At night, I'd sit on my porch with a cup of tea, staring into the dark, asking myself when it had all changed. Where had I gone wrong? Had I pushed him too hard? Not hard enough. Was I just a stepping stone in his climb? Every mother expects a little distance as her child grows up, but this wasn't distance. This was erasure, quiet, gradual, and complete. And the more he erased me, the more I started erasing myself. It was a Sunday evening when the worst of it happened, not in some dramatic blow-up or argument, but in a dinner, one that was supposed to be special. Jordan had invited me to meet his fiancée's parents. Her name was Amanda. Polished, corporate. The kind of woman who wore silk scarves and used the word legacy in casual conversation. I hadn't met her parents yet, but I knew they were wealthy and well-connected. Her father was a retired investment banker. Her mother ran a foundation for young women in business, the kind of family that read the Wall Street Journal over coffee and talked about equity portfolios at the breakfast table. When Jordan extended the invitation, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe he was proud of me after all. Maybe he wanted them to meet the woman who raised him. I spent 2 days planning what to wear and even got my nails done. I wore a burgundy dress I'd saved for special occasions and a pair of modest heels. I looked in the mirror and thought, "You did good, Clarice. You built a life." The restaurant was upscale, one of those places with tiny portions and leather-bound menus. Jordan and Amanda were already seated when I arrived. He stood to greet me, gave me a quick kiss on the cheek, then gestured to the other couple. "Mom, this is Charles and Lydia." They smiled politely and we shook hands. Amanda complimented my earrings. Jordan didn't say anything about how I looked. We ordered drinks and conversation started flowing. They asked polite questions. Where I was from, what I did, and I answered with grace. I run a commercial cleaning company. Started it myself about 25 years ago. I smiled. Lydia nodded. That's admirable. It must be quite the challenge, managing staff and scheduling. Charles added, It's a very necessary service. People often forget that infrastructure runs on the invisible hands of others. I appreciated the sentiment until Jordan laughed. Yeah, Mom definitely taught me about hard work. I mean, I was helping her clean office toilets before I even hit puberty. There it was. The table chuckled. I forced a smile. My wine glass trembled slightly in my hand, so I set it down. Jordan leaned back in his chair like he'd just told a great story. I remember once, he continued, she made me clean gum off the bottom of a desk, and I swore I'd never work in maintenance again. Guess it worked. Here I am. Amanda giggled. Her parents smiled, slightly unsure. My face burned, but I stayed quiet. Then Lydia said gently, It must have been hard raising a child while running a business. I nodded. It had its challenges, but I was determined. I wanted Jordan to have options I never had. Charles asked Jordan, So your mom never went to college? Jordan shook his head. Nope. High school diploma and grit. That's her MBA. He laughed. They chuckled again. I sat there trying not to shrink, trying to find the woman who had once walked into offices with confidence and pitched her cleaning services to men in suits, but she wasn't at that table. No one meant to be cruel. That's what made it worse. It was all so casual, so easy. The way he turned me into a story for their entertainment, not the mother who raised him, but the janitor who mopped up his childhood. Dinner moved on. I barely tasted my food. I nodded and smiled at all the right moments, but inside I felt like I was disappearing. I realized I hadn't been invited to be celebrated. I had been invited to complete a narrative. Look how far I've come. Even my mom was once poor. I was a footnote in his success story. When the check arrived, I reached for my wallet. Jordan stopped me. I got it, he said. Consider it a thank you for raising me. His words were kind, but his tone held something else. Patronizing, maybe. Final, as if the chapter on me was closed. I stood in the parking lot afterward, the cool air brushing my skin, watching the four of them laugh as they walked to their car. No one noticed I wasn't walking with them. That night, I went home and placed the burgundy dress in the back of my closet. I didn't cry. I just sat in the dark and stared at the ceiling. I kept thinking about the way he said toilets, like that's all I was, a reminder of a life he wanted to forget. It was the moment I knew. I was no longer part of his present. I had become a character in his past, and that realization, quiet, cruel, and unspoken, cut deeper than any insult ever could. 2 weeks after that dinner, I got a call from a woman named Tasha, the office manager at Jordan's company. My cleaning crew had been working there for nearly 4 years, ever since Jordan recommended me for the contract. It was a steady gig, one of our highest paying accounts, and I made sure we handled it with extra care. My team knew the building like the back of their hands. We cleaned on schedule, restocked supplies, even replaced a shattered mirror in the executive washroom once without charging extra. That building was part of our rhythm. "Hi, Clarice," Tasha said, her voice flat and formal. "I wanted to give you a heads up before the paperwork comes through. We're ending our cleaning contract at the end of the month. We're moving to a bigger facilities management company with broader services." I blinked, unsure if I'd heard right. Was there a complaint? "No, no complaints," she said quickly. "Your team's been great. This is more of a strategic decision. You've probably heard we're expanding." I hadn't. Jordan hadn't said a word. "I see," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Thanks for letting me know." After we hung up, I just sat there in my office, a converted sunroom in my modest ranch-style house, staring at the wall. My desk was littered with invoices, supply orders, and timesheets, but my mind was blank. I knew without asking that Jordan had something to do with the decision. He didn't fight for me. He didn't advocate. Maybe he even suggested it. I would never know, and at that moment, I didn't want to. That afternoon, I called Marla, one of my longest employees, and asked her to handle the final few weeks at that office. I told her I had too much on my plate. The truth was, I couldn't stomach walking into that building again, not as just the cleaner, not as the mother he barely acknowledged. Later that evening, Jordan texted me, "Hey, I heard the facilities team went with a new vendor. Hope you're not too upset. It's just business. Nothing personal. Just business. Nothing personal." The same words his father had once said before leaving us for good. I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. For the next few weeks, I functioned on autopilot. I showed up to other jobs, double-checked supplies, answered calls with a smile, but inside, I felt hollow. Jordan hadn't just taken away a contract. He'd taken away a piece of my dignity. I started questioning everything. Had I been naive to think I was still part of his life? Had I confused proximity with connection? When I walked through my home, I began noticing the framed photos lining the hallway. Jordan in kindergarten, Jordan at prom, Jordan in his cap and gown holding his diploma. I had kept those moments like little trophies, proof that my sacrifices had built something real, but now they felt like relics of a time when he still saw me. One evening, I stood in my kitchen, hands deep in a sink full of suds, and stared out the window. The sun was setting, casting an amber glow over the backyard where Jordan used to chase fireflies. I thought about how he once held my hand and said, "You're the strongest person I know, Mom." I wondered when that belief had turned into embarrassment. The pain wasn't loud. It was quiet and constant, like a low-grade fever. I didn't rage. I didn't curse his name. But I did start to step away. Not because I stopped loving him, but because I couldn't keep holding on to someone who had already let go of me. I stopped reaching out. I stopped offering help. I canceled my trip to visit him for his birthday. No explanation, just silence. And something surprising happened in that silence. I started breathing again. For years, I'd been chasing a version of motherhood that made me invisible, always supporting, never seen, always strong, never vulnerable. But that night, for the first time in years, I sat down and allowed myself to feel everything. The grief, the betrayal, the hollow ache of being cast aside. I didn't scream, I didn't cry. I simply accepted the truth. I had been forced out of his life, not with cruelty, but with indifference. And somehow, that made it worse. The next morning, I packed away the framed photos and placed them in a box in the closet. Not out of spite, but to make space. I didn't know what I was making space for yet, only that I needed it. People thought I was done. Quietly retreating, winding down, a woman nearing retirement, losing her place in the world. But inside me, something small was still burning, and though no one could see it, not even me, the spark was still there. Losing the contract with Jordan's company should have been just another business hurdle, something to chalk up to growth, change, the shifting tides of the corporate world. But it wasn't. It was personal. It was a fracture deep in my core, and it didn't just affect my business. It shook something inside of me I hadn't touched in years. The first sign that I was slipping came a week after the call from Tasha. I walked into one of my regular client buildings, a small law office we'd been cleaning for over a decade, and realized I'd forgotten to send the invoice for the last 2 months. That had never happened before. I was meticulous with my records, even when I had to handwrite them in notebooks back in the day. Now I was letting things slide. Then came the headaches. Long, dull, persistent aches that started behind my eyes and crawled through my neck like vines. I didn't tell anyone. I took aspirin, drank water, and kept moving, but the tension was constant. I started waking up at 3 a.m., heart pounding, my mind filled with numbers, missed calls, conversations I should have had but didn't. The real bottom, though, wasn't the pain or the forgetfulness. It was the feeling of irrelevance. One Saturday morning, I drove to the park. I used to take Jordan there as a boy. He loved the swings and the giant spiral slide. I thought maybe sitting there would give me peace, clarity, something. But as I sat on the bench watching families play, I realized I had no idea what to do with myself when I wasn't working or fixing or helping someone else. There was a little girl nearby, maybe 5, tugging on her mother's coat and pointing to the snack cart. Her mother smiled, handed her a few dollars, and walked with her hand in hand to the vendor. I used to do that. I used to be that. Now I was a woman with aching knees, faded dreams, and a silence in her phone that screamed louder than any argument. I pulled my coat tighter around me and leaned forward, elbows on my knees, staring down at the gravel. What do you do when the person you love most in the world makes it clear you're no longer part of their world? For years, my identity was tethered to being Jordan's mother, his provider, his backup plan. I was the safety net he never had to see. Just trust would be there if he fell. And now? Now I was the embarrassment in the background, the support system he didn't want to acknowledge, the woman he politely tolerated when necessary and neatly excluded the rest of the time. I started questioning everything: my business, my worth, my past choices. I even thought about selling the company entirely. What was the point anymore? My employees were good people, but I felt like I was floating above everything, like I didn't belong in the day-to-day anymore, like I'd outlived my purpose. Even my house felt heavy. Every corner held memories I couldn't escape. The kitchen, where I used to bake Jordan's favorite peach cobbler. The hallway he used to race down in socks, sliding and giggling. The bedroom where I cried myself to sleep after his father left. All of it layered with years of sacrifice that now felt unnoticed. One night, I sat on the floor of the laundry room, surrounded by baskets of clean clothes I hadn't put away, and cried into a pile of folded towels. Not loud, not dramatic, just quiet, broken sobs that soaked the fabric and shook my shoulders. I whispered things I hadn't said out loud in years. I gave you everything. I was good to you. I didn't deserve this. That was my lowest moment, not because I'd lost a contract or because I felt old or tired, but because for the first time in my life, I believed the lie I had fought for so long, that what I'd built didn't matter, that because it didn't come with a degree, a title, or a corner office, it wasn't enough, that I wasn't enough. It's strange. The things that can break you, not the big blows. We brace for those. It's the slow, creeping things, the look in someone's eyes when they've decided you're less than, the meals they skip, the calls they don't return, the cold professionalism from a child who used to kiss you goodnight. That was my rock bottom, not a scream but a silence, not a collapse but a quiet unraveling. And yet, somewhere in the center of that stillness, a small voice, barely a whisper, began to speak. It wasn't hope, not yet, but it was something. A few days after that night on the laundry room floor, I finally pulled myself together enough to do something I'd been putting off for years. Cleaning out the attic. It was part distraction, part necessity. The insulation up there was old, the boxes were gathering dust, and I figured if I couldn't sleep or focus on work, I might as well be useful. The attic was cramped, musty, and hotter than I remembered. I flipped on the single bulb overhead, casting a dull glow across years of my life stacked in cardboard. There were bins of Jordan's childhood drawings, baby clothes, my mother's old cookbooks, and a few albums from my teenage years. I opened one and saw a photo of myself at 17, wearing overalls and a shy smile, standing next to my first car, a beat-up Corolla with one door that wouldn't open from the inside. That girl had dreams, big ones. She was going to open a bakery, study interior design, maybe travel to Italy. She never made it to any of those things. Life had other plans, but she fought hard for every inch she gained. I pushed the album aside and dug further until I came across a heavy, black binder. Its edges frayed, pages slightly warped from age. I didn't recognize it at first. Then I opened it. My breath caught in my throat. Inside were pages of handwritten notes, spreadsheets I'd drawn by hand, sketches of business logos, lists of cleaning products, and their prices. It was my original business plan, the one I wrote over 2 decades ago when I first dreamed of starting Clarice's home and office cleaning. I'd completely forgotten I'd even saved it. I flipped through the pages slowly, like I was touching a version of myself I hadn't seen in years. There were margins scribbled with motivational quotes, notes to myself like, "Don't take jobs that disrespect your time," and "If you don't believe in your work, no one else will." And then, about halfway through the binder, I found a single loose sheet of paper tucked behind a financial projection. It was yellowed and creased, folded twice. I opened it carefully. At the top, written in my own handwriting, were the words, "Someday I'll own a building instead of cleaning one." I sat back on my heels, the attic heat forgotten, the dust swirling around me like snow. I had written that line the week I landed my first big client, a dentist's office, with shiny floors and stubborn coffee stains in the waiting room carpet. I was so proud of that contract. I remembered staying up late, calculating overhead costs, dreaming of one day having an office of my own, a real headquarters, a place with my name on the door. But life got busy, Jordan grew, bills piled up, and that dream, like so many others, got folded and stored away, both literally and figuratively. Staring at that sentence now, something shifted. It wasn't just a memory, it was a reminder that I hadn't built this life by accident, that even without a degree, a formal education, or corporate polish, I had vision, I had plans, I had ambition, and somewhere along the way I had traded all of that for survival, for sacrifice, for someone else's success. I sat there for nearly an hour, flipping through every page, rereading every line. With each section I remembered the woman I used to be, the one who taught herself bookkeeping at night, who saved tips to buy cleaning supplies in bulk, who never missed payroll even when it meant skipping meals. She was still here, buried maybe, quiet definitely, but alive. When I finally came back downstairs, I brought the binder with me and set it on my kitchen table like a sacred text. I made a pot of tea and sat in silence, staring at it. It didn't solve everything. Jordan was still distant. The contract was still gone. My heart was still bruised. But that line, "Someday I'll own a building instead of cleaning one," echoed louder than his indifference. It dared me to remember what I was capable of. It challenged the belief that I had peaked, that my best years were behind me. I realized something crucial that night. Jordan didn't erase me. I had allowed myself to fade. But now, holding that binder, I knew one thing for certain. It wasn't too late to begin again. And this time, I wouldn't just build a business. I'd build something that couldn't be ignored. Not by him, not by the world, and most importantly, not by myself. The binder didn't just remind me of who I used to be. It lit something up inside me, like striking a match in a long, dark room. That night, I didn't sleep much. I sat at the kitchen table until well past 2 a.m., flipping through the old business plans, highlighting passages, jotting down new notes in the margins, not because I had a clear plan yet, but because for the first time in a long while, I wanted something for myself. The next morning, I woke up with purpose. Real purpose. Not the kind that keeps you afloat, but the kind that pulls you forward. My knees still ached, the bank balance hadn't magically changed, and Jordan still hadn't called. But none of that mattered in the same way it used to. Something had shifted. My energy was no longer focused on the pain of being dismissed. It was now tied to something bigger than my hurt. My ambition had finally stopped apologizing for showing up. I began my days earlier. I pulled out old vendor contact lists, updated them. I researched business podcasts and YouTube channels while I folded laundry or prepped for cleanings. I dusted off my laptop and signed up for free online courses. Marketing, small business law, even real estate basics. My internet history looked like a college syllabus. I'd always told myself school wasn't for me, not because I wasn't smart, but because there was no time. Now, I made time. One evening, while reviewing my old client contracts, I came across a note I'd written after losing a bid to a larger facilities company. Too small to scale, too familiar to grow. I remember writing that in frustration, but now it felt like a challenge. Why not scale? Why not grow? Who said a woman like me couldn't own something bigger? For years, I'd kept my business small and manageable so I could be present for Jordan. School events, doctor appointments, all the nights he stayed up late doing homework and I sat beside him, cleaning grout from tile samples. I made myself small so he could dream big. But now? He was living his life unapologetically. Why couldn't I? I started reconnecting with former clients. Not for cleaning contracts, but to ask questions. One owned a local chain of gyms. Another ran a few co-working spaces. If someone were interested in purchasing commercial property, I asked one of them, what would you look for? They were curious, even impressed. You thinking of buying a building? One asked. I'm thinking about finally cashing in on everything I've built. I liked the sound of that. I met with a financial advisor, not a flashy one, just a kind woman named Elise from a local credit union who spoke plainly and listened carefully. We ran numbers. We assessed my assets. 3 work vans, some savings, a modest retirement account, and the business itself. You don't have the capital to buy a major property yet, Elise said. But with some smart moves, you could, in a year or two, maybe less if you partner with the right people. A year or two. That timeline would have scared me before. Now it felt like an invitation. I stopped telling myself I was too old to start again. I was 58, not dead. I had experience, relationships, a reputation for quality and trust, and I was finally seeing those things as currency. The best part? I didn't tell anyone what I was doing, not Jordan, not Amanda, not even my staff. It wasn't out of secrecy. It was about ownership. For the first time in my life, I wasn't working to prove something to anyone else. I was building something for me. One morning, I stood outside a small office building that had just gone on the market. It was nothing fancy. Brick facade, outdated signage, a cracked walkway. But I imagined what it could be. A headquarters, a training center, a home base for my team. The symbol of a woman who didn't just survive, but evolved. I ran my hand along the chipped wood of the front door and whispered, I'm not done. Because I wasn't. That spark I'd almost let die. It was now a fire. It didn't roar. It didn't demand attention. But it burned steady and strong. And no one, not my son, not his success, not even my own self-doubt, was going to put it out again. I didn't make any grand declarations. There were no dramatic announcements, no social media posts, no heart-to-hearts with friends. Just quiet movement, strategic steps, silent setup. I'd spent most of my life being loud about my love, my sacrifice, my loyalty. But now, I was learning the strength in silence. The first thing I did was clean house. Not my actual house, but my business. I went through every contract, every invoice, every client file. I identified the accounts that were dragging us down and renegotiated or let them go. That alone freed up time, energy, and, to my surprise, a decent chunk of cash flow. I restructured my team, shifted responsibilities, and promoted Marla, one of my most trusted employees, to supervisor. She was stunned, but ready. And I needed someone I could trust because I had other moves to make. I stopped taking on new cleaning contracts personally. Not because I couldn't, but because I had finally accepted that growth meant letting go of certain hats. I was no longer just the worker. I was the owner, the builder, the visionary, and it was time I acted like it. In the evenings, I immersed myself in market research. I learned about commercial zoning laws, tax liens, distressed property sales. I started following local auctions, paying attention to industrial buildings being sold below market due to foreclosures or mismanagement. Most of it was foreign to me at first. Legal terms, insurance requirements, asset evaluations. But I treated it like a new language. And just like cleaning, the more I practiced, the easier it became. I joined a few small business forums online under a fake name, just to ask questions without judgment. How do you evaluate whether a property can be converted for office use? What are hidden costs people forget to check for before buying a building? The answers came from strangers, but they were gold. I even sat in the back of a real estate investment seminar one Saturday. It was full of men in sharp suits talking fast and loud, tossing around numbers like poker chips. I didn't say a word. I just watched, took notes, underlined phrases I didn't understand so I could look them up later. I also started building relationships, the kind of relationships that made deals happen. I reached out to a woman named Danielle, an old client who had left corporate marketing to start her own consulting firm. We'd always gotten along. I invited her to lunch. "I'm thinking about expanding," I told her as we sipped iced tea in a quiet corner booth. "Clarice," she said, setting down her glass, "you've been expanding for 20 years. What do you really mean?" "I'm thinking about ownership, long-term, property, branding, maybe even bringing in a second-tier management team." She blinked, then smiled. About time. She connected me with a few people. A property broker who didn't mind small fish, a commercial lender who cared more about cash flow than college degrees. I showed up to every meeting prepared, organized, and focused. I didn't pretend to know everything, but I didn't let anyone make me feel small either. I wore my experience like armor. Every stain I'd scrubbed, every shift I'd pulled, every broken vacuum I fixed at midnight to make sure my team could keep their jobs the next morning. It all counted. Behind the scenes, I began putting together a proposal to buy a mid-sized commercial building in a transitioning part of town. Nothing flashy, just 4 floors, decent bones, and a lot of potential. It had sat vacant for months. I knew I could renovate it, lease out 2 floors, and convert the others into office space for my operations. I didn't tell Jordan. I didn't need to. He was still posting curated photos from rooftop parties and networking events, still talking about his new team, his latest product pitch, still oblivious to what was growing just beneath his radar. But I knew. I knew what I was building. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't even about him anymore. It was about taking back the parts of myself I had given away too easily. My vision, my courage, my voice. So I moved quietly, powerfully, and brick by brick, floor by floor, I began laying the foundation for the woman I was always meant to become. No spotlight, no applause, just a woman with a binder full of dreams, finally giving herself permission to go all in. It wasn't immediate. Power rarely shifts in one loud moment. It happens slowly, through little wins that start stacking until you look up and realize the scales have tipped. For me, the shift began with respect. Not the kind that's given with applause, but the kind you feel in how people start speaking to you, looking at you, listening to you. The first time I felt it was during a site walkthrough of the building I had my eye on. The broker, a seasoned man named Alan, had initially looked at me like I was lost. I didn't blame him. I walked in with a canvas tote bag and sensible shoes, not some power suit or designer heels. But I had a clipboard full of numbers, a floor plan I'd printed out and marked up myself, and a checklist of potential renovations. By the time we finished walking all 4 floors, Alan's tone had changed. "You've clearly done your homework," he said. "This place needs work, but if anyone can flip it with precision, it's someone like you. Someone like me." For the first time in years, that phrase didn't sting. It empowered. From there, the momentum grew. I finalized the financials with Elise, the credit union advisor. I put in my offer, under asking price, but with a solid, clear plan that made sense on paper. 3 weeks later, it was mine. I signed the paperwork in a plain office with no one around, no champagne, no balloons, just my pen, a firm handshake, and a deed with my name on it. Clarice Milton, property owner. The building was rough, but it had good bones, just like me. I used local contractors, women-owned businesses where I could. I supervised the renovations myself. Every tile, every fixture, every coat of paint had my fingerprint on it. Not just because I wanted control, but because this was mine. No one was going to hand me the keys. I was earning every square foot. While the renovations were underway, I quietly started restructuring my cleaning company. I created a brand new division, a commercial maintenance arm that offered not just janitorial services, but logistics, repairs, supply management, even front desk support. I packaged it like the bigger facilities companies did, but with the heart and attention to detail we'd always brought to the work. It was everything we already knew how to do, just repackaged for a bigger stage. And clients started noticing. Old clients who had drifted away came back. New ones, impressed by our rebrand and professional upgrades, signed on for pilot contracts. For the first time in my career, I was negotiating from strength, not necessity. The irony? I started hearing whispers about Jordan's company during all of this. Nothing confirmed, but murmurs from people in my growing network. They're losing people left and right. Leadership's been unstable since that product launch flopped. Apparently, their main investor pulled out. I didn't take joy in it. I didn't laugh or gloat. I just listened and nodded, the way you do when someone describes a storm you knew was coming. The real moment, the undeniable shift, came the day I got a call from one of the junior partners at Jordan's company. He didn't know I had history there. He'd found our new company portfolio through a mutual connection and was interested in our bundled services. They were considering switching vendors again. I could have said no. I could have hung up and walked away forever, but I didn't. Not out of revenge, out of strategy. This wasn't about getting back at Jordan. This was about finishing what I started. So I scheduled the meeting. I walked into that building not with a mop and bucket, but with a proposal folder and a business card that read, Clarice Milton, CEO. The receptionist greeted me differently this time. The conference room door was opened for me, not by me. As I sat down across from the executives, including Jordan, who walked in late, paused mid-step when he saw me, then forced a tight smile. I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Complete control. He looked confused, cautious, but I was calm, collected. The meeting moved forward, line by line, number by number. No mention of the past, no emotion, just business. And for the first time in our relationship, I was the one with leverage. He wasn't laughing now. He wasn't smirking. He was watching me, really watching, as I presented a solution to a problem he couldn't fix. Because the truth is, when people think they've outgrown you, they never expect to see you rise again, and certainly not above them. But I had. And the most powerful part? I did it in silence. No threats, no warnings, just quiet, steady transformation. The kind no one sees coming until it's too late. The room was quiet after I finished my presentation. The kind of quiet that doesn't come from confusion, but respect. For a moment, no one spoke. Eyes flicked between one another, processing the proposal I had just delivered with calm precision. I closed the folder in front of me and looked up. My hands were still. My voice had been steady the entire time, and the numbers were undeniable. Across from me sat 3 executives, and one of them, seated directly across, was Jordan. He didn't speak first. That surprised me. The Jordan I knew always tried to control the room, tried to steer the narrative, but this Jordan was quiet, his expression tight, his eyes unreadable. Maybe it was the shock. Maybe it was the fact that his mother, the woman he once referred to as just the cleaner, now sat at the head of the table offering solutions he couldn't. The junior partner finally broke the silence. "This is impressive. You've clearly thought this through." 25 years of thinking," I said with a soft smile. "It adds up." There was a small laugh from someone near the back of the room, a nervous one, not mocking but admiring. Jordan's shoulders stiffened. The HR director flipped through a copy of the contract. "You're proposing bundled services, quarterly reviews, and employee training on site. That would replace 3 of our vendors." "Correct," I said. "Less turnover, fewer contracts to manage, more accountability." Jordan leaned forward at last. "You didn't tell anyone you were involved in this bid." He wasn't angry, he wasn't confrontational, but I heard it, the crack in his voice, the confusion behind the words. He was trying to reconcile 2 things: the mother he thought he'd outgrown, and the businesswoman now offering a solution his team desperately needed. "No," I said simply. "I didn't." "Why not?" I met his eyes for the first time since I walked in. "Because you made it very clear a long time ago that you preferred to keep our worlds separate." I was just respecting that. He blinked. One of the executives glanced between us, clearly sensing something beneath the surface, but choosing to remain silent. "Good choice." Jordan cleared his throat, trying to recover. "I just meant this is unexpected." "I understand," I replied. "But I assure you, the numbers and the outcomes speak for themselves. You don't need to factor in who I am to make a decision. Either this solves your problem or it doesn't." I turned back to the rest of the room. I'm not here as someone's mother. I'm here as the head of a service company that's ready to scale and deliver results. My team is prepared. Our operations are solid. You need consistency, and we offer it. They asked a few more questions, mostly about onboarding timelines and flexibility with weekend shifts. I answered each one without hesitation. At no point did I raise my voice. No point did I bring up the past. This wasn't about proving anything anymore. It was about power and clarity, and finally taking up the space I had always earned. As we stood to leave, Jordan followed me out into the hallway. The door shut behind us with a soft click. "You really built all this without saying a word." "Yes," I said, "because I didn't need to be seen to grow. I just needed to stop waiting for permission." He looked down, hands in his pockets. "I didn't know." "I know you didn't." "I'm sorry." I didn't say anything for a moment. I looked at the familiar hall, the polished floors, the potted plants, the framed motivational quotes on the wall. I used to clean under those plants, dust those frames, back when he barely acknowledged I was even there. Now he was standing beside me, unsure, small in a way I had never seen him before. "I'm not angry, Jordan," I said finally. "You were young. You didn't see me clearly, and maybe I didn't help you see me either. But this moment right now, it isn't about regret. It's about what I do with what's mine." He nodded. "I hope they approve the contract." "They will," I said, "because it's the right decision for the company." And I walked away. Not out of bitterness, not with a dramatic exit, but with the calm certainty of a woman who no longer needed anyone to validate her worth. For the first time, I had spoken my truth. Not with anger, not with shame, but with strength. I didn't reclaim my voice to be heard by him. I reclaimed it to hear myself. And now that I had, I would never go silent again. A month after that meeting, I received confirmation. The board had unanimously approved my company's proposal. We were officially replacing their existing vendors, including the facilities management firm that had once taken my original contract away without a second thought. The irony was sharp, poetic, and completely satisfying. Still, I kept things professional. I didn't call Jordan. I didn't celebrate publicly. I sent a simple email confirming the onboarding schedule and assigned Marla to oversee the initial transition. It was just business. Exactly how he'd once described cutting me out. But fate, as it often does, had one more turn waiting. About 2 weeks into the new contract, I got a call from Danielle, the marketing consultant who'd helped me earlier in my journey. She sounded excited. "Clarice, I don't know if you've seen the news, but Jordan's company just announced a major restructuring. Layoffs, leadership shifts. It's all over the local business sites." I hadn't seen it. I rarely checked those anymore. I was too busy growing something real. Still, curiosity got the better of me. I opened the article. The headline read, "Tech Startup Restructures After Internal Shakeup. CFO Steps Down Amid Performance Concerns." CFO Jordan. I read every word slowly. The piece was tactful, but it was clear. The company's rapid growth had come with oversights. Budget issues, investor disappointment, leadership instability. Jordan had been asked to step down to pursue new opportunities. I sat there, letting the words settle. Not with glee, but with a strange, quiet knowing. It wasn't that I wanted him to fail. No mother ever truly does. But I couldn't deny what I felt. A full circle moment. Not revenge, not even justice, just clarity. And then, one day, I saw it happen. I was at the building for a scheduled inspection, something I did from time to time, unannounced, to keep standards high. I was walking past the front lobby when I saw security escorting someone through the glass doors. It was routine, calm, professional, but then I recognized the shoulders, the walk. It was Jordan. He wasn't in handcuffs. There was no scene. Just a man in a tailored blazer with a cardboard box in his hands and a tight, pale expression on his face. He looked straight ahead, his jaw clenched. He didn't see me. I was tucked into a corner near the elevators, half behind a column. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just watched. Because this wasn't a moment for confrontation. This wasn't a chance to say, "Now you know how it feels." It was a moment of realization. Mine, not his. He was walking out of a building I now had partial ownership of, a company now reliant on the services I built, and a position he'd once believed made him untouchable. And the person he once looked down on had just become someone his former colleagues now addressed with reverence and respect. There was a poetry to it, a quiet, devastating balance. I turned and walked in the opposite direction, heading toward the service stairwell. I took the stairs instead of the elevator. 3 flights. Each step felt lighter. Back in my office, I closed the door behind me and sat for a long time. I didn't cry. I didn't laugh. I just breathed in the silence and finally understood the difference between justice and vengeance. Justice isn't always loud. It doesn't always come with applause or gasps. Sometimes it's just a door closing behind someone who never thought they'd have to leave. Sometimes it's standing still, while the very world that once ignored you now leans on the foundation you built. I thought back to the binder in my attic, to the line I wrote years ago. "Someday I'll own a building instead of cleaning one." I didn't just own the building, I owned my story. I owned my silence, my strength, my scars. Jordan's downfall wasn't the climax of my story, it was just a footnote. The real twist wasn't in what happened to him. It was in what I chose to do with the power I'd finally reclaimed. And I had done it not by fighting for a seat at someone else's table, but by building my own. It had been 2 months since I last saw Jordan walk out of that building. Since then, life had grown busy and fulfilling in ways I hadn't expected. My days were packed with strategy meetings, contractor walkthroughs, vendor calls, and new client consultations. But for the first time, the busyness didn't feel like survival. It felt like momentum. Then, one evening, as I was going over payroll with Marla in the new office, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I don't usually answer those, but something in my chest stirred. I picked up. "Mom." It was his voice. Soft, cautious, smaller than I remembered. I paused for a second, not out of anger, but because I didn't want to answer with the version of myself that used to shrink when he spoke. "Yes," I said. There was a long silence on the other end. I wasn't sure if you'd answer." "You weren't sure, but you still called," I replied. Not cold, just truthful. "I didn't know who else to talk to," he said. "Everything's falling apart." I listened quietly as he shared the story. After his resignation, things spiraled. He'd been job hunting, but the tech market was tight. The investors were whispering about his missteps. Amanda had called off the engagement. She said I lost who I was, he muttered. I don't know what to do anymore, he admitted. And I guess I wanted to hear your voice. I waited a moment before responding. Jordan, I said slowly, I've always been your mother, and I've always loved you, but the version of me you knew, the one who waited by the phone, who softened herself to make you feel taller, she doesn't exist anymore. He didn't interrupt. I'm not saying that to hurt you. I'm saying it because it matters. You treated me like I was background, like I was there to carry you and disappear when you no longer needed me. But I didn't disappear. I rebuilt. I know, he whispered. I was wrong. You were young. You believed success meant leaving behind the people who got you there. I know where that comes from. The world teaches us that. Another pause. Then, I miss you. I sat with that. It was true, maybe, but missing someone and valuing them are different things. I appreciate the call, I said, and I hope this time gives you space to figure out who you really are. Without titles, without companies, without pretending. Would you be open to having coffee? Just to talk? This time I really thought before answering. I'd be open to seeing you, I said, but not to fix anything, not to go back. I won't apologize for my success or dim my light to make you comfortable. If we meet, it's as two adults who can speak honestly, not a son expecting his mother to make things right again. I understand, he said. And for the first time in years, I believed he actually did. We scheduled a time for that weekend. I didn't dress up. I didn't rehearse what I'd say. I just showed up as myself. He was already at the cafe when I arrived, standing awkwardly near the entrance. He gave me a nervous smile and reached out for a hug. I returned it. Not coldly, but not the kind of embrace that comes with deep ease. We were rebuilding something. Or maybe just standing in the rubble together. We talked. About small things at first, then deeper ones. He asked about my building, my clients, my team. For the first time, he didn't brush off my success. He leaned into it. You really did it, he said. You built something they couldn't take from you. I built something I wouldn't give away again, I corrected gently. When we parted, he asked, Can I call you sometime? Yes, I said, but only if you're calling as a man who respects who I've become, not one trying to bring back who I used to be. He nodded. I walked away feeling grounded, not triumphant, not sentimental, just whole. Because reconciliation is never about returning to what was. It's about deciding what you're willing to carry forward. And this time, I was carrying only what honored the woman I had fought so hard to become. The seasons had begun to shift again. The air crisper, the mornings quieter, the sun rising just a little later each day. I noticed these changes more now. Not because I had more free time, but because I had more presence. When you stop chasing after people who never saw you clearly and start choosing yourself, time doesn't slow down, but you do. And in that stillness, everything becomes more vivid. One Saturday morning, I unlocked the front door of my newly renovated office building. The sign out front gleamed in the early light, *** Milton, and Company Solutions. *** Clean, modern lettering on brushed steel. I ran my fingers across it before walking inside, coffee in one hand, clipboard in the other. The place was quiet. Most of my staff were off for the weekend, but I liked coming in early when it was empty. Not to work, just to *be* there, to walk the halls, to sit in the chair I once thought was too big for someone like me, to breathe in the space I had created from nothing but grit and belief. I walked past the break room, where a fresh pot of coffee had been set to auto brew, past the training lounge where Marla had recently led a team session on quality control, past the corner window that used to leak before we redid the roof, now sealed and perfect, offering a view of the city I used to feel invisible in. I stepped into my office, a clean, calm space with soft lighting, plants by the windows, and photos of my team on the shelves. Not of Jordan, not anymore. Not because I didn't love him, but because I had finally accepted that my life didn't need to revolve around being someone's mother to matter. There was one picture I kept on my desk, though. Me holding up a mop and smiling, taken 25 years ago outside the first building I ever cleaned. I looked so young, so hopeful, so unaware of the battles ahead, but also so full of power even then. It just hadn't been realized yet. Next to it was the binder, the same one from the attic, now wrapped in a protective sleeve. I opened it once a week, sometimes just to read that one line again. Someday I'll own a building instead of cleaning one. And here I was. I didn't feel pride in a flashy way. I didn't feel the need to show off. What I felt was quieter, a kind of peace that only comes when you've walked through fire, been written off, and still kept building. Jordan called occasionally now. Our conversations were different. He listened more, asked questions, respected boundaries. He wasn't trying to fix things, and neither was I. We were just learning how to see each other, not through the lens of roles or resentment, but through mutual truth. That was enough. One afternoon, he sent me a photo of a small business grant he'd helped approve for a minority-owned cleaning company in his new role, this time at a nonprofit focused on supporting underserved entrepreneurs. "I think you'd be proud of this," he wrote. And I was, not just because of the work, but because he was finally beginning to understand the value of people like me. People who build in silence, love without conditions, and rise without permission. I replied simply, "Good work. Keep going." Sometimes people ask me what the biggest lesson was, what I learned from all of it. The erasure, the humiliation, the rise. And the truth is, I didn't just learn one thing. I learned that quiet women are not weak, that sacrifice doesn't make you small, but you have to be careful not to let it erase you. I learned that age is not an expiration date, that beginnings can happen at 58, that sometimes justice takes the form of ownership, not confrontation. I learned that motherhood is not martyrdom, and that love, real, lasting love, doesn't ask you to disappear. But most importantly, I learned that you don't need anyone else to believe in you, if you can just remember how to believe in yourself again. So I sat there in my office that morning, the hum of the city outside, the sound of a life rebuilt from the ground up surrounding me. And I smiled. Not because it had been easy, but because I'd finally stopped asking the world for a seat at the table and built the whole damn room myself.